Hello again. Now, hate speech continues to be a concern globally. Recently, rapper and businessman Kanye West got into trouble for anti-Semitic comments in the United States. As a result, he lost some major business deals and sponsorship deals like the likes of Adidas in terms of his business partnerships, although he'd apologized later on. But now here in South Africa, there are concerns about Afrophobia, xenophobia and homophobia, as well as on the internet and social media. I'm joined now in the studio by Ambassador Deborah Lipstard. She is the special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism of the United States, and Jamie Migthi, a South African researcher and analyst of African affairs. Ambassador and Jamie, welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. You are here, Ambassador, in South Africa to take part in a very important discussion around this kind of issues that we're seeing with the rise of hate speech in the world. Tell us about that.
Well, there's been a rise certainly in the United States, but that has been mirrored by a rise of anti-Semitism in many parts of the world. Here in South Africa, it's less of an overt problem. But what we're seeing is that certainly with social media, in your introduction you talked about incidents happening in the United States. With social media, it's harder and harder to draw a distinct
Yeah, there are no borders on the internet.
On the internet, there are no borders at all.
Yeah. So you are here to share your experience?
I'm here to share my concerns. I have been a researcher, a professor, a teacher of this topic for over 3 decades. I'm not here to come and wag my finger and say, you know, you've got it wrong and we've got it right. I'm here to say, and my boss, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, who was here in South Africa not long ago, said about me that Ambassador Lipstad's job, Deborah's job, is to go out and say, we have a problem in our country and we take it seriously because we see it as a threat not just to one group of people, i.e. the Jews, but as a threat to democracy in general, and we hope your country is taking it seriously.
Jamie, let me bring you in your research. I mean, here in South Africa, we've experienced racism during apartheid days, and we've experienced bigotry, and we've also experienced recently Afrophobia and foreign nationals being targeted. Are you seeing that is also a threat to democracy, as Ambassador Lipstard just said?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to contextualize why exactly it's a threat to democracy. See, these democracies that we exist in are liberal democracies, which means that they are based on liberal values. It's not just about voting. It's about institutions and values. Those values are inclusive of freedom, equality, and tolerance, which means that you accept a variety of viewpoints, a variety of identities. What we've started seeing around the world is that certain identities have started being attacked as being the other. People are not part of a country. People are not part of the in-group. So that manifests itself in different ways. It manifests itself in homophobia, as you've said, in queerphobia, more broadly, transphobia. But specifically as well, we've seen manifestations of xenophobia, of Afrophobia, and anti-Semitism. All of them are part of this right-wing, sort of far-right rise across the world.
Yeah, one would have thought maybe with the struggles for freedom around the world, including here, including the United States, and the gains that were made, that we wouldn't be here talking about this today. We should be really in a freer, much more free and much more just and fair society. I mean, in 2016, I think the movie was about, there was a movie, Denial, about your story with David Irving having, he's a denialist of the Holocaust, challenging you and suing you, and you in court coming out victorious and stuff. You'd have thought there are lessons there for people like that to say, no, we should actually be working more towards the values that we embrace one another as human beings.
One would hope.
But where do you think we're getting it wrong? What's going wrong?
I think Jamie just said it in many respects. There are a number of things happening. There's a growing extremism, a growing populism in the sense that I'm right, you're wrong. It's not two legitimate points of view. There's a growing separatism and a nationalism, extreme. I'm not against all nationalism, but when it comes extreme, us against them. And I think there are also certain groups in societies which feel themselves displaced of jobs that they thought were rightfully theirs, and they look for someone to blame. And if they blame the bicycle riders, we'd say they're crazy. But if they blame, in my country, black people, or they blame Jews, or they blame here in South Africa other people, black people from other countries, it makes sense. It's legitimate.
So they're easy, find scapegoats, and
exactly.
And then it's fueled by hatred. Before we just talk about the dangers of hate speech, I just want to play a clip from a trailer of that 2016 film Denial, for some of our viewers who may not have seen it, which is based on your true story.
My story.
Okay, let's take a look.
I say to you quite tastelessly that more women died on the back seat of Senator Edward Kennedy's car at Chappaquiddick than ever died in a gas chamber at Auschwitz.
It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Deborah Lipstard.
Whatever the reasons that people become deniers, they often have an agenda which they won't admit to.
Why do you continually denigrate the work of David Irving?
You can have opinions about the Holocaust, but I won't meet with anyone who says the Holocaust didn't happen.
Professor Lipstad, I am that David Irving. And I've got $1,000 to give anyone who can show me a document that proves the Holocaust.
I will not debate you, not here, not now, not
But
ever.
you can't. Well,
Irving's just sent us notice of...
Okay, you have to point out that was an award-winning documentary as well on that story. But when you hear that, Jamie, you've said there's a rise of right-wing movements and people find scapegoating like it's the way to go, and they feel like they are marginalized, and then they attack groups of other people. What does it say about leadership?
Leadership is actually a very important part of this equation, because the diversification of affluent nations is something that has been happening historically, but there's been a shift in how that diversity is handled. So even in America, if you look at before the 1970s, they made a lot of efforts to incorporate migrants and to find status for them. But then there's been a shift more recently in the last 12 years to rejecting migrants, to otherizing them and attacking them. And there's a book that came out this year by Yashua Monk called The Great Experiment. And in it, he outlines that move away from leaders embracing diversification to rejecting diversification actually has played a role in the exacerbation of these attacks.
Yeah, and these attacks, I mean, hate speech is dangerous. It leads to violence.
Absolutely. No genocide begins with the genocideers saying, oh, let's go kill those people. Every genocide begins with words, whether you're talking about the Armenian genocide, the Rwanda genocide, the Holocaust, and many others.
You mentioned the Rwandan genocide. I remember that a broadcaster described one group of people as cockroaches. Let's go and kill cockroaches.
See, it starts with words, and then the people who want this to happen push a little further and a little further. That's why, as Jamie was saying, it's so important and you were asking about leadership, for leaders to speak out at the beginning. Once it's a genocide, it's too late to stop.
Yeah, are you getting a sense that leaders are courageous enough? Because we're seeing this rise again. We're talking about there's a rise of right-wing movements, and there's a spike in hate speech, and it finds expression, and some people even in this country would use our constitution, which has got a freedom of expression, but it doesn't give you freedom of hate speech, but they say, oh, but I've got a freedom to express myself. I mean, what can be done besides awareness? What more can be done?
I think awareness, speaking out. Certainly leaders should speak out, but that doesn't free the person on the street, the person who sits down to dinner with their uncle who begins to engage and use racial epithets or anti-Semitic epithets, and he doesn't want to say anything because it's a family dinner. We must speak out. We can't be silent, and we have to speak out about the little things, because the big things begin with little
And when
things.
the big things happen, it might be too late.
It's generally too late.
Jamie?
I think one of the things also is to keep up with the definitions as defined by the victims. What you'll often find from these political entrepreneurs or people who are seeking political leadership through Afrophobia, anti-Semitism, or xenophobia is that they will say, what I'm saying actually is not Afrophobia, or it's not anti-Semitic, even though the victim community is actually saying this particular thing you're doing is either a microaggression or it's a modification of the form of hate, because you are either still in effect spreading animus towards us and actually creating resentment. So I think that's a particular thing which needs to happen, clear definitions which don't come just from the people perpetrating, but from the communities as they receive the acts.
Final word to you, Ambassador. You are here for a short while. You're taking part in that meeting. You say you haven't come here to point a finger and tell us what to do. What do you hope to get out of this visit to South Africa?
What I hope to get out of this visit is, first of all, to learn about the situation here in South Africa, and to get both government leaders, some of whom I've met with, leaders of NGOs, educators, students, professors, to recognize that anti-Semitism is a threat. It must be taken seriously. It is a prejudice like the panoply of other prejudices, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, etc., and that everybody has a role in stopping hatred. It's not just for the leadership. It's everyone has to play a role.
Yeah, because when hate speech manifests in violence, you might be seeing a group of people becoming under attack, and you do nothing about it, and you say nothing about it, you might be next.
You might be next, or someone else might be next, and children emulate, young people emulate.